The Self-Sabotage Paradox. Why you destroy what you want and how to break the cycle. Written and published by Fearless Audiobook. Introduction. There is a strange moment when you realize that the person standing between you and everything you want may not be an enemy, circumstance, or lack of opportunity. It may be you. You want success, yet you procrastinate when the opportunity finally arrives. You want love, yet you become distant when someone gets close. You want confidence, yet you listen to the voice that tells you that you are not enough. You promise yourself that things will change, only to find yourself repeating the same choices. This is the paradox of self-sabotage. The painful truth is that we don't always destroy what we want because we don't care about it. Sometimes we destroy it because achieving it forces us to confront fears we have carried for years. Fear of rejection, failure, judgment, responsibility, vulnerability, or even success itself. Behind every self-defeating pattern, there may be a story you have never understood. In this audiobook, we will uncover those hidden stories. We will explore why familiar pain can feel safer than unfamiliar freedom, how old wounds shape present choices, why you repeat patterns you promised to break, and how to interrupt the cycle. This journey may challenge the way you see yourself, but it can also give you something powerful, the ability to stop fighting yourself and start becoming your own ally. Chapter 1. The Strange Way. We hurt ourselves. There is a particular kind of pain that is difficult to explain. It is the pain of knowing exactly what you want, seeing the possibility of having it, and then somehow becoming the person who moves away from it. You may want a better career, yet keep delaying the work that could take you there. You may want a loving relationship, yet become distant when someone begins to care about you. You may dream of changing your life, yet repeatedly return to the habits that keep you exactly where you are. It can feel confusing, even frightening, because you know what you want, but your actions seem to tell a completely different story. This is one of the strangest things about being human. We can desire something consciously while resisting it emotionally. Self-sabotage often begins quietly. It rarely announces itself as destruction. It may appear as one more day of procrastination, one more excuse, one more unnecessary argument, one more opportunity you convince yourself you are not ready for. You tell yourself you will begin tomorrow. You decide the timing is wrong. You convince yourself that the opportunity is not good enough. You become obsessed with finding flaws. You wait until everything feels perfect, knowing somewhere inside that perfection may never arrive. Then, when the opportunity disappears, you feel disappointed. Sometimes you even tell yourself that life never gives you what you want. The painful irony is that you may have participated in creating the outcome you are grieving. This does not mean every failure is self-sabotage. Life contains circumstances we cannot control. People experience unfairness, rejection, loss, financial hardship, illness, and unexpected obstacles. It would be cruel and inaccurate to blame ourselves for everything that goes wrong. Self-sabotage is different. It appears when a repeated pattern of behavior quietly works against something we genuinely value. The important question is not, why am I ruining my life? A better question is, what am I trying to protect myself from? That question changes everything. Sometimes the behavior that looks irrational from the outside makes perfect emotional sense when you understand the fear underneath it. A person who avoids applying for a better job may not simply be lazy. They may be afraid of rejection. Someone who refuses to become emotionally vulnerable may not lack the ability to love. They may have learned that closeness can lead to pain. Someone who repeatedly delays an important goal may not lack ambition. They may be protecting themselves from the possibility of trying their hardest and discovering that they still might fail. Self-sabotage can therefore become a form of emotional protection. The problem is that protection can eventually become a prison. Imagine someone who has spent years being criticized. Eventually, they develop a habit of criticizing themselves before anyone else can do it. They tell themselves their ideas are stupid, their work is not good enough, and their dreams are unrealistic. On the surface, this looks like low confidence. But underneath it may be an old strategy. If I reject myself first, other people's rejection will hurt less. The strategy may have once helped them survive emotionally, but years later it is preventing them from taking risks, accepting compliments, building relationships, and recognizing their own potential. This is why self-sabotage can be so difficult to recognize. The behavior often provides an immediate reward. Procrastinating can temporarily reduce anxiety. Avoiding a difficult conversation can temporarily create peace. Rejecting someone first can temporarily protect you from abandonment. Giving up on a goal can temporarily protect your ego from failure. Staying in a familiar situation can temporarily protect you from uncertainty. The immediate relief feels good. The long-term consequence comes later. And because the brain naturally responds to immediate emotional relief, the pattern can become stronger over time. This creates a cycle. Something triggers fear or insecurity. The uncomfortable emotion appears. You respond with a familiar behavior. The behavior reduces the discomfort for a moment. Then the consequences arrive. You feel disappointed, ashamed, frustrated, or trapped. That emotional pain becomes another reason to escape. Eventually, the same pattern begins again. The cycle can continue for years without you fully understanding it. Perhaps you have experienced this yourself. You decide that this time will be different. You make a promise. You feel motivated. For a while, everything seems to change. Then something uncomfortable happens. Maybe you receive criticism. Maybe progress becomes difficult. Maybe someone gets emotionally close. Maybe success begins demanding more responsibility. Suddenly, the old behavior returns. You procrastinate, you withdraw, you overthink, you create excuses, you quit. Then you ask yourself, why do I always do this? The answer may not be that you are weak. It may be that your mind has learned a familiar response to emotional discomfort, and learned patterns can be unlearned. The first step is awareness. You cannot change a pattern you refuse to see. Instead of judging yourself every time you make a mistake, begin observing what happens immediately before the behavior. What were you feeling? What were you afraid might happen? What thought appeared in your mind? What did the behavior give you in that moment? Maybe procrastination gave you relief. Maybe withdrawal gave you a sense of control. Maybe perfectionism protected you from criticism. Maybe quitting protected you from discovering whether you could succeed. These questions allow you to look beneath the behavior. The goal is not to become suspicious of every decision you make. It is to become honest enough to recognize when fear is quietly making decisions on your behalf. Because sometimes the greatest obstacle is not a lack of opportunity. It is the invisible conflict between what you consciously want and what another part of you believes is safe. You can want freedom and still fear uncertainty. You can want love and still fear vulnerability. You can want success and still fear responsibility. You can want change and still fear losing the familiar identity you have built around your current life. That contradiction does not make you broken, it makes you human, but understanding it gives you a choice. The next time you find yourself moving away from something you genuinely want, pause before judging yourself. Look closer. Ask what fear is underneath the resistance. Ask what your behavior is trying to protect, and ask whether that protection is still necessary. Because the moment you understand why you hurt yourself, you can finally begin learning how to stop. Chapter 2. When your mind becomes your enemy. Your mind can be the place where your greatest dreams are born, but it can also become the place where those dreams quietly disappear. The same mind that imagines a better future can fill you with reasons to avoid it. It can remind you of every mistake you have made, every rejection you have experienced, and every moment when you felt inadequate. Then, without realizing it, you begin treating those memories as predictions of what will happen next. This is how your mind can become your enemy, not because your mind is naturally against you, but because it can learn patterns that were created to protect you from pain. Fear is one of the strongest forces behind self-sabotage. Yet fear rarely announces itself by saying, "I am afraid." Instead, it often disguises itself as logic. You tell yourself that you are being realistic when you are actually afraid to try. You say that you need more preparation when you are afraid of being judged. You convince yourself that an opportunity is not right for you when you are afraid that you might fail. Fear becomes especially powerful when it sounds reasonable because you can follow it without realizing that you are running away. Imagine receiving an opportunity that could transform your career. At first, you feel excited. Then the questions begin. What if I fail? What if people discover that I am not as capable as they believe? What if I make the wrong decision? What if everyone notices my weaknesses? Instead of taking action, you begin researching endlessly, waiting for more confidence, preparing for every possible problem, and telling yourself that you will act when you feel ready. Eventually, the opportunity disappears. You feel disappointed, but somewhere beneath the disappointment there may also be relief. That relief is important because it teaches your mind that avoidance works. The fear appeared, you escaped the situation, and the fear temporarily became smaller. This creates a powerful cycle. Fear creates discomfort. Avoidance creates relief. Relief reinforces avoidance. The next time a similar situation appears, your mind remembers what happened before and encourages you to escape again. Over time, this response can become automatic. You may stop recognizing it as fear and start calling it your personality. You might say, "I am just cautious, I don't like taking risks," or "I work better under pressure." Sometimes those statements are true, but sometimes they are explanations built around a pattern that has never been questioned. Insecurity adds another layer to the problem. When you feel insecure, ordinary events can become evidence against you. A small mistake becomes proof that you are incompetent. Someone else's success becomes proof that you are falling behind. A delayed message becomes evidence that someone has lost interest. A single rejection becomes a prediction about every future opportunity. The event may be small, but the meaning you attach to it can be enormous. Your mind does not simply observe reality. It interprets reality through the beliefs you already carry. This is where old beliefs become powerful. Somewhere along the way, you may have learned that you were not good enough, not attractive enough, not intelligent enough, not successful enough, or not worthy enough. Perhaps you were criticized repeatedly. Perhaps you were compared with others. Perhaps your efforts were ignored. Perhaps you experienced rejection at a time when you did not have the emotional tools to understand it. Experiences can become beliefs, and beliefs can eventually become invisible rules that influence your choices. A person who once learned, "I am not good enough," may grow into an adult who avoids situations where their abilities could be tested. They may refuse opportunities, remain silent when they have valuable ideas, or abandon projects before anyone can evaluate them. When they fail to progress, they may think, "I knew I couldn't do it." But the belief helped create the behavior that produced the disappointing result. This is one of the cruelest parts of self-sabotage. Sometimes the belief appears to be proven true because the person unconsciously behaves in ways that support it. Shame can make this pattern even more painful. Guilt says, "I did something wrong." Shame says, "There is something wrong with me." Guilt can encourage correction, but shame attacks identity. When you feel ashamed, a mistake no longer becomes something you can learn from. It becomes evidence that you are fundamentally flawed. You may hide, withdraw, become defensive, or punish yourself. You may even stop trying, because trying would create another opportunity to discover that you are not enough. In this way, shame doesn't simply hurt emotionally. It can influence behavior and quietly strengthen self-sabotage. The inner critic often becomes the voice of that shame. It tells you that your work is never good enough, that everyone else is ahead, that you should have done more, that you are too late, or that your mistakes define you. Because the voice is inside your own head, it can sound like truth. But familiarity does not make a thought accurate. A thought can be repeated for years and still be wrong. One of the most important steps toward breaking self-sabotage is learning to separate what your mind says from what reality actually proves. You may think, "I am going to fail," but a prediction is not a fact. You may think, "They don't respect me," without actually knowing what another person feels. You may think, "I am not ready," even when you have enough knowledge to begin. You may think, "I always ruin everything," even though your life contains countless moments that contradict that statement. The goal is not to eliminate negative thoughts. Human beings cannot control every thought that enters the mind. The goal is to stop treating every thought as an instruction. When a fearful thought appears, pause and question it. Ask yourself what you are afraid will happen. Ask whether the danger is real, imagined, or connected to something from your past. Ask what evidence supports the belief and what evidence challenges it. Most importantly, ask what you would do if fear were not making the decision for you. These questions create distance between the thought and the action. Within that distance is something incredibly valuable: choice. Your mind may continue to remember rejection. It may continue to warn you about failure. It may continue to bring old insecurities to the surface. But you can learn to respond differently. You can teach yourself that uncertainty is not always danger, that failure is not the same as worthlessness, that rejection is not proof that you are unlovable, and that success does not require perfection. You can learn to move forward while fear is present. The mind that once protected you through avoidance can eventually become the mind that guides you through courage. You do not need to defeat your mind or silence every uncomfortable thought. You need to understand it, question it, and choose your response consciously. Because the moment you stop believing every fearful story your mind tells you, you begin taking back control of the life those stories were quietly shaping. Chapter 3. The Comfort of Staying Stuck. A familiar life can feel strangely safe, even when it is not the life you truly want. You may complain about the same job every morning, remain in a relationship that leaves you emotionally empty, postpone a dream you have carried for years, or continue habits that you know are hurting you. Deep down, you may want something different. Yet when the possibility of change becomes real, fear appears. The strange truth is that people sometimes remain trapped, not because they love their situation, but because they understand it. They know how to survive the pain they already have. The unknown offers no such certainty. This is one of the hidden reasons self-sabotage can continue for years. We often assume that people stay stuck because they lack ambition, intelligence, or discipline. But sometimes the real problem is that change threatens their emotional sense of safety. Even an unhealthy situation can become familiar enough to feel comfortable. The mind knows its routines, its expectations, its disappointments, and its coping mechanisms. A new life may be better, but it requires uncertainty. And uncertainty can feel more dangerous than familiar pain. Think about someone who has spent years complaining about an unfulfilling job. Every morning they tell themselves that they cannot continue like this. They imagine earning more, doing meaningful work, or building something of their own. They watch videos about changing careers and make plans in their head. Yet when an actual opportunity appears, hesitation begins. They tell themselves they need more experience. They worry about financial risk. They imagine rejection. They promise themselves that they will make a serious change next month. Then another month passes, and nothing happens. From the outside, it may look like a lack of motivation. But look closer. The current job may be exhausting, but it is predictable. The person knows what time they start work, what responsibilities they have, who they work with, and how much money arrives at the end of the month. Leaving would mean uncertainty. It would mean starting again, possibly failing, and discovering whether the dream was realistic. Staying creates frustration, but leaving creates fear. When fear becomes stronger than frustration, people often choose the familiar. This does not mean every difficult situation should be abandoned. Real life contains responsibilities that cannot simply be ignored. Financial commitments, family obligations, and practical circumstances matter. The point is not that staying is always wrong. The point is to understand why you are staying. Are you making a thoughtful decision based on your values and circumstances? Or are you allowing fear to make the decision for you? That distinction can change your life. Sometimes the strongest chains are not external. They are the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. If you have spent years thinking, "I am unlucky, I never succeed, people always leave me," or "I am not the kind of person who takes risks," those beliefs can become part of your identity. And once a belief becomes part of your identity, changing your circumstances may feel like changing yourself. Imagine someone who has always considered themselves unsuccessful. They remember the job they did not get, the relationship that ended, the business idea that failed, and the opportunity they missed. They rarely remember the moments when they adapted, succeeded, helped someone, or overcame difficulty. Their mind collects evidence for the identity it already believes. Then one day, a significant opportunity appears. Instead of feeling only excited, they feel uncomfortable. Success would challenge everything they have believed about themselves. Without realizing it, they may hesitate, procrastinate, or create unnecessary obstacles. Not because they do not want success, because success would require them to become someone unfamiliar. This is why people sometimes protect their limitations. Limitations can be painful, but they are predictable. If you believe you are incapable, you know how to behave. You keep your expectations low. You avoid situations where you might be judged. You can explain every disappointment by saying, "That's just who I am." But if you start believing that you are capable, you lose the comfort of that explanation. Suddenly you are responsible for discovering what you can actually do. Responsibility can be frightening. The same pattern can appear in relationships. Someone may desperately want a healthy, loving relationship, but repeatedly choose emotionally unavailable people. They complain that nobody gives them enough attention, yet when someone stable and emotionally available appears, they feel strangely uninterested. They may describe the relationship as boring or lacking chemistry. But perhaps what feels like boredom is simply the absence of familiar chaos. If you grew accustomed to uncertainty, stability can feel unfamiliar. If you learned that love must be earned, unconditional affection can feel suspicious. If you experienced rejection, genuine acceptance can feel difficult to trust. The mind does not automatically recognize what is healthy. It often recognizes what is familiar. That is why familiarity can be mistaken for safety. But there is a hidden cost to staying in familiar patterns. Every time you choose the known simply because it is known, you reinforce the belief that you cannot handle anything different. The comfort becomes smaller while the world you avoid becomes larger. You avoid rejection, but you also avoid opportunity. You avoid vulnerability, but you also avoid intimacy. You avoid failure, but you also avoid achievement. You avoid uncertainty, but you also avoid growth. Eventually, you may realize that the life you were trying to protect yourself from was not actually worse than the life you were living. It was simply unfamiliar. This is why change often begins with a difficult question. What is staying the same costing me? Most people ask what change might cost them. They worry about losing money, comfort, relationships, status, or security. Those questions are reasonable, but they rarely ask what staying stuck will cost them over the next year, 5 years, or decade. Time is a cost. Regret is a cost. Unfulfilled potential is a cost. Repeated disappointment is a cost. The life you never attempt is also a cost. This does not mean you should make reckless decisions. It means you should evaluate both sides honestly. Staying is a decision. Changing is a decision. Doing nothing is also a decision. Sometimes the first step toward change is not a dramatic transformation. It is a small act that challenges the familiar pattern. Apply for the opportunity, have the conversation, take the course, start the project, set the boundary, ask for help. Try something that makes you slightly uncomfortable. You do not need to know exactly where the path will lead. You only need enough courage to take the next step. Confidence often comes after action, not before it. Clarity often appears after movement, not while standing still. You may never feel completely ready to leave the familiar behind. Readiness is often something you build through experience. So when you feel yourself returning to an old pattern, pause and ask, am I choosing this because it is right for me or because it is familiar? The answer may reveal more than you expect. Because sometimes the life that keeps you stuck does not need a lock. It only needs your belief that the outside world is more frightening than the cage you already know. And once you realize that, you can begin opening the door. Chapter 4. The fear of becoming who you could be. There is a fear that rarely receives the attention it deserves. It is not the fear of failure. It is the fear of becoming successful enough to outgrow the person you have always been. Failure can be painful, but it is familiar. Success can be frightening because it demands change. It can ask you to leave behind old habits, old identities, old relationships, and old explanations for why you have not become the person you imagined. Sometimes the future you dream about feels threatening precisely because it would require you to become someone you have never been before. Most people understand the fear of failing. They recognize the anxiety that comes before an important exam, a business decision, a job interview, or a difficult conversation. But the fear of success is more complicated because it can hide behind behaviors that look like laziness, uncertainty, or a sudden loss of motivation. You may work toward a goal for months, then lose interest just when you are close to achieving it. You may receive an opportunity and immediately start finding reasons why you should not accept it. You may dream about financial freedom, recognition, leadership, or a meaningful relationship, yet become uncomfortable when those things begin to become real. Why would success create fear? Because success changes the conditions of your life. When you fail, you can return to what you already know. When you succeed, you have to maintain something new. A promotion may bring responsibility. Financial success may require discipline. A healthy relationship may require emotional vulnerability. Recognition may expose you to criticism. Achievement may raise expectations. Suddenly, the dream that once looked perfect comes with obligations you never imagined. This can create a strange internal conflict. One part of you says, I want this. Another part quietly asks, what happens if I actually get it? That second question can create resistance. You may begin delaying important decisions, creating unnecessary problems, or convincing yourself that the goal no longer matters. Sometimes, self-sabotage is the mind's attempt to return you to a level of familiarity where you feel emotionally safe. Your identity plays an important role in this process. Every person carries an internal story about who they are. Perhaps you see yourself as the struggling person, the overlooked person, the person who never gets opportunities, or the person who always has to fight for everything. If you have lived with that identity for years, it can become surprisingly comfortable, even when it causes pain. When success begins to challenge that identity, your mind may resist, because changing your circumstances also means changing your understanding of yourself. Imagine someone who has always thought of themselves as unsuccessful. They have struggled financially, watched others move ahead, and quietly developed the belief that success is for other people. One day, their career begins to improve. Their income increases. New opportunities appear. Instead of feeling completely happy, they become anxious. They start spending carelessly, avoiding difficult decisions, missing important deadlines, or questioning whether they deserve the progress they are making. Their behavior may appear irrational, but underneath it is an identity conflict. Their external life is changing faster than their internal self-image. The same thing can happen in relationships. Someone may desperately want a healthy partner, yet feel uncomfortable when they finally meet someone emotionally available. They may be accustomed to uncertainty, emotional distance, or unstable relationships. A calm relationship can initially feel unfamiliar. They may interpret peace as boredom or stability as a lack of passion. Without realizing it, they create problems because chaos feels more familiar than healthy intimacy. This is why becoming who you could be often requires more than achieving goals. It requires allowing your identity to evolve. You must become comfortable with the idea that you are no longer the person who made certain decisions in the past. You can become more disciplined without being the person who once procrastinated. You can become confident without pretending you were never insecure. You can become successful without constantly proving your worth. Growth requires making peace with the fact that your future self may look unfamiliar to your present self. Another hidden fear is the fear of judgment. Success can make you more visible. When you are struggling, people may overlook you. When you begin succeeding, people may notice. They may have opinions, expectations, questions, or criticism. Some people unconsciously sabotage their progress because remaining ordinary feels safer than becoming visible. They fear being judged for trying, succeeding, changing, or wanting more. There can also be a fear of disappointing others. Imagine growing up in an environment where your choices were strongly influenced by what others expected from you. Perhaps you learn to avoid conflict by keeping your ambitions small. As you grow older, pursuing your own path may create guilt. You may worry that becoming more successful will make someone else feel left behind or cause people to accuse you of changing. So you hold yourself back to preserve emotional familiarity. But shrinking yourself does not create genuine connection. It only creates resentment and regret. The challenge is learning to distinguish between real responsibility and imagined responsibility. You can care about people without sacrificing your entire future for their comfort. You can change without becoming arrogant. You can succeed without abandoning your values. You can grow while remaining connected to the people who genuinely support you. Perhaps the most important question is this: what if the person you are becoming feels unfamiliar because you have spent too long identifying with your limitations? Growth can feel uncomfortable precisely because it challenges the boundaries you have placed around yourself. When you begin acting with confidence, discipline, courage, or self-respect, you may initially feel like you are pretending. That feeling does not necessarily mean you are being fake. It may simply mean you are practicing a new identity. You do not need to wait until you feel completely comfortable to grow. Comfort often arrives after repetition, not before it. The next time you notice yourself pulling away from an opportunity you genuinely want, don't immediately assume that you have lost interest. Pause and ask whether you are afraid of the responsibility that comes with it. Ask whether success would require you to change something about your identity. Ask whether being seen, judged, or expected to perform is frightening you. And ask whether the life you say you want is asking you to become someone your old beliefs have not yet learned to recognize. You may discover that the obstacle is not a lack of ability. It may be the fear of meeting your own potential. And sometimes breaking self-sabotage means accepting that the person you are becoming will no longer fit inside the life you have outgrown. Chapter 5. The Wounds You Never Meant to Carry. Some of the behaviors that cause the most confusion in our lives have roots much deeper than the moment when they appear. You may wonder why you become distant when someone gets close, why criticism feels unbearable, why rejection stays in your mind for years, or why you constantly expect something good to go wrong. You may blame yourself for being too sensitive, too guarded, too insecure, or too difficult. But sometimes the behavior you dislike is connected to a wound you never consciously chose to carry. We all collect emotional experiences as we move through life. Some are small and quickly forgotten. Others leave impressions that remain long after the event itself has ended. A harsh comment, repeated criticism, rejection, betrayal, humiliation, abandonment, or persistent feeling of not being enough can influence the way we see ourselves and other people. The mind does not simply remember what happened, it also tries to learn from it. It asks, consciously or unconsciously, "What should I believe so this never hurts me again?" That question can create protective beliefs. If you were repeatedly criticized, you may learn to become extremely careful. If your mistakes were punished harshly, you may develop perfectionism. If affection was inconsistent, you may become anxious whenever someone becomes distant. If people you trusted disappointed you, you may decide that depending on anyone is dangerous. If you experienced rejection, you may begin rejecting yourself before anyone else has the opportunity. These responses can make sense in the environment where they developed. The problem is that the environment changes while the protective strategy remains. A child who learns to stay quiet to avoid criticism may become an adult who struggles to express opinions. Someone who learns that vulnerability leads to rejection may become an adult who hides emotions even from people they trust. Someone who learns that love can disappear without warning may constantly search for signs that their partner is leaving. The original wound may be in the past, but the behavior continues operating in the present. This is one of the most painful aspects of emotional wounds. They can influence situations that have nothing to do with the original experience. A person may receive genuine kindness and still suspect it. They may receive praise and immediately dismiss it. They may meet someone trustworthy and continue waiting for betrayal. They may achieve something impressive and immediately worry that they will lose it. The present moment is safe, but the nervous system remembers a different time. This can create self-sabotage because the person begins responding to today's reality through yesterday's fear. Imagine someone who was frequently criticized while growing up. Over time, they learned that making mistakes attracted humiliation. As an adult, they become highly perfectionistic. They spend hours checking simple tasks, delay submitting work, and avoid opportunities where their performance might be evaluated. They tell themselves they simply have high standards, but beneath those standards is fear. They are not only trying to produce excellent work, they are trying to avoid the emotional pain associated with being wrong. The perfectionism may protect them from criticism in the short term, but it also prevents progress. They work slowly, miss opportunities, become exhausted, and sometimes abandon projects altogether. What began as protection eventually becomes self-sabotage. This pattern can appear in relationships too. Consider someone who experienced rejection early in life. They may become extremely sensitive to small changes in another person's behavior. A delayed response feels like abandonment. A change in tone feels like anger. A busy day feels like rejection. Instead of waiting for clarity, they react. They become distant, demand reassurance, create conflict, or leave before the other person can leave them. The painful irony is that the behavior designed to prevent abandonment can eventually create it. This does not mean that every difficult behavior is caused by childhood experiences. Human behavior is complex. Our personalities, environments, current circumstances, relationships, choices, and experiences all interact. The purpose of looking at emotional wounds is not to find someone to blame. It is to understand ourselves more accurately. Understanding is powerful because you cannot consciously change a pattern that you interpret only as a character flaw. If you tell yourself, "I'm just broken," you are likely to feel hopeless. If you understand, "I learned to protect myself by avoiding vulnerability," you suddenly have something you can work with. That difference matters. Your past may explain your behavior, but it does not have to control your future. This is where self-compassion becomes essential. Self-compassion does not mean telling yourself that everything you do is acceptable. It means being willing to examine your behavior without turning the examination into another attack on yourself. You can say, "This behavior is hurting me, and I understand why I learned it. Now I need to learn something healthier." That is a much more powerful position than shame. Healing also requires recognizing that some protective behaviors are no longer necessary. The world may not be the same world you experienced when the wound was created. The person who criticized you may no longer be present. The relationship that betrayed you may be over. The environment that made you feel powerless may be far behind you. Yet your mind may still behave as if the danger is happening now. This is why change can feel strange. You may intellectually understand that you are safe while emotionally continuing to behave as if you are not. Learning to trust the present requires repetition. You need new experiences that contradict the old belief. If you learned that vulnerability always leads to rejection, you may need to experience relationships where honesty creates connection. If you learn that mistakes make you worthless, you may need to make mistakes and discover that your value remains intact. If you learned that you cannot depend on yourself, you may need to keep small promises until your actions begin proving otherwise. Healing is not about erasing the past. It is about changing your relationship with the past. You can remember what happened without allowing it to decide what happens next. You can acknowledge the wound without building your identity around it. You can respect the person you had to become to survive difficult experiences while recognizing that you may need different strategies to build the life you want now. Some wounds remain tender for a long time. That does not mean you are weak. It means they mattered. But the fact that something hurt you does not mean it gets to control you forever. You are allowed to become less guarded. You are allowed to trust again carefully. You are allowed to make mistakes without destroying yourself. You are allowed to receive love without immediately searching for its ending. You are allowed to succeed without believing that success will eventually expose you as a fraud. The wounds you never meant to carry may have shaped you, but they do not have to write the rest of your story. Chapter 6. Why you keep repeating the same story. Have you ever promised yourself that you would never make the same mistake again, only to find yourself standing in another version of the same situation months or years later? You remember the disappointment. You remember the frustration. You remember the moment when you told yourself, "Next time will be different." Yet somehow the same kind of relationship, conflict, failure, or missed opportunity appears again. It can feel as if your life is repeating a story you desperately want to change. The painful truth is that repeated patterns rarely disappear simply because we recognize that they are hurting us. They continue because something inside us still finds the pattern familiar, predictable, or emotionally useful. Self-sabotage is often less about one terrible decision and more about a sequence of small choices. You may choose a familiar type of relationship, react to criticism in a familiar way, delay important work for familiar reasons, or abandon opportunities at the same stage of progress. Each decision may seem unrelated, but when you step back and look at your life as a whole, a pattern can begin to appear. You are not simply experiencing the same problem repeatedly. You may be responding to different situations with the same emotional strategy. The human mind naturally looks for familiar pathways. Once a response has been repeated enough times, it can become automatic. You do not have to consciously decide to become defensive when criticized, withdraw when someone gets close, or procrastinate when a task feels overwhelming. The response can appear before you have fully understood what you are feeling. This automatic reaction may have developed because it once helped you cope with discomfort. The problem is that a strategy that protected you in one situation can become destructive when you continue using it everywhere. Consider someone who repeatedly chooses emotionally unavailable partners. At the beginning, the relationship may feel exciting. The uncertainty creates intensity, and the person becomes invested in earning affection. When the partner becomes distant, they chase harder. When the partner becomes available, they may suddenly lose interest. After another painful ending, they conclude that they always choose the wrong people. But the deeper question is why emotional unavailability feels familiar or attractive. Perhaps uncertainty is what they learned to associate with love. Perhaps they have become comfortable proving their worth instead of simply receiving affection. This is how familiarity can be mistaken for compatibility. Something can feel natural simply because you have experienced it many times. That does not mean it is healthy. A person raised around constant criticism may become comfortable with criticism. Someone accustomed to emotional instability may mistake chaos for passion. Someone who has always doubted themselves may feel uncomfortable when others genuinely believe in them. The familiar pattern can feel like home even when it is painful. The same thing happens with achievement. Someone may repeatedly set ambitious goals, become intensely motivated, work hard for a short period, and then abandon the goal when progress becomes difficult. They may blame a lack of discipline or motivation, but perhaps the deeper pattern is an inability to tolerate the emotional discomfort that comes with slow progress. Starting provides excitement and possibility. Continuing requires patience, uncertainty, repetition, and the willingness to be imperfect. When the excitement disappears, the person escapes into a new goal. A fresh beginning gives them another temporary feeling of hope, without forcing them to confront the discomfort of finishing. The pattern may not be, "I can never succeed." It may be, "When progress becomes uncomfortable, I find a reason to escape." That distinction matters because it tells you where the real work needs to happen. To understand your own repeated patterns, start paying attention to triggers. A trigger is an event, situation, thought, or feeling that activates a strong emotional response. It might be criticism, rejection, silence, uncertainty, intimacy, failure, success, comparison, or feeling ignored. The trigger itself is not necessarily the problem. What matters is what happens inside you after it appears. A useful framework is to observe 5 stages: trigger, emotion, thought, behavior, and consequence. Something happens. You experience an emotion. Your mind creates an interpretation. You respond through a familiar behavior. Then you experience the result. For example, your manager gives you critical feedback. You feel embarrassed and afraid. Your mind interprets the criticism as proof that you are incompetent. You become defensive and stop asking questions. Your performance suffers. Your manager becomes more concerned. You interpret that concern as confirmation that you were never capable in the first place. The cycle feeds itself. This is why emotional triggers deserve attention. When you know what activates your automatic responses, you can recognize the pattern earlier. Instead of noticing it after the damage is done, you begin noticing the first signs. Maybe you suddenly want to withdraw. Maybe you feel an urge to quit. Maybe you start searching for reasons why an opportunity will fail. Maybe you feel compelled to send an angry message. Maybe you start telling yourself that you never really wanted what you worked so hard to achieve. That moment is important. It is the moment when the old story becomes visible. Awareness does not automatically remove the urge to repeat the behavior. You may still feel the same fear or insecurity. But awareness creates space between the emotion and the action. That space gives you something you did not have before, a choice. Breaking a pattern also requires accepting that the healthier response may initially feel uncomfortable. If you are used to withdrawing, staying present may feel dangerous. If you are used to procrastinating, beginning immediately may create anxiety. If you are used to seeking constant reassurance, allowing uncertainty may feel unbearable. If you are used to criticizing yourself, treating yourself with compassion may initially feel like weakness. But unfamiliar does not mean wrong. Sometimes it simply means new. You should also stop expecting perfection. A pattern repeated for years will not disappear after one moment of insight. You may recognize the trigger and still react badly. You may understand the fear and still make the wrong decision. You may make progress and then temporarily return to an old behavior. That does not erase your growth. Instead of saying, "I failed again," ask, "What happened immediately before I returned to the old pattern?" Maybe you were exhausted. Maybe you felt rejected. Maybe you expected too much from yourself. Maybe you were overwhelmed. Maybe you needed support. The answer gives you information. Information allows you to prepare differently next time. The goal is not to become someone who never repeats a mistake. The goal is to become someone who recognizes the pattern faster, understands it more deeply, and interrupts it more often. Your repeated story was built through countless small choices. That means it can also be rewritten through countless small choices. You do not need to change your entire life today. You need to begin making a different decision at the moment when the old decision normally appears. The next time you recognize a familiar cycle, pause. Notice the trigger. Name the emotion. Question the thought. Observe the urge. Then ask yourself what choice would serve the person you are becoming rather than the person you have been. You may not control the first thought that enters your mind. You may not control the emotion that rises within you, but you can gradually learn to control what happens next. And that is where the story changes. Not when the past disappears, not when fear disappears, but when you stop allowing the same old pattern to write the ending. Chapter 7. Detachment is not indifference. Many people misunderstand emotional detachment. They hear the word detachment and imagine someone who no longer cares, someone who becomes distant, cold, unavailable, or emotionally unreachable. They imagine shutting down every feeling so that nothing can hurt them again. But that is not emotional detachment. That is emotional avoidance. True detachment is not about building walls around your heart. It is about building enough strength within yourself that you no longer need to build walls around it. You can care deeply and still remain detached. You can love someone and still maintain your identity. You can support someone without carrying every problem they have. You can feel someone's pain without making it your own. You can experience disappointment without allowing it to destroy your entire sense of peace. Detachment does not make your heart smaller. It makes your heart steadier. Think about the difference between love and emotional dependency. Love says, I want you in my life. Dependency says, I cannot be okay without you. Love allows another person to be separate from you. Dependency begins to treat another person's behavior as the condition for your emotional survival. If they are happy, you feel happy. If they are distant, you become anxious. If they approve of you, you feel secure. If they withdraw, you feel worthless. When your emotional state depends entirely on another person, you have given them a level of control they were never meant to have. This can happen gradually. You begin checking their mood before deciding how you feel. If they seem irritated, you immediately wonder whether you did something wrong. If they are quiet, you feel responsible for fixing the silence. If they are struggling, you abandon your own needs to rescue them. You become so emotionally connected to their experience that you forget where their emotions end and yours begin. Healthy detachment creates that boundary. It allows you to say, I care about what you're going through, but I cannot live your emotional life for you. This is especially important when you love someone who struggles emotionally. Your instinct may be to fix everything. You want to make them feel better. You want to remove their pain. You may believe that if you can just say the right thing, provide enough support, or sacrifice enough of yourself, you can protect them from suffering. But love does not give you control over another person's emotional journey. You can listen, you can support, you can encourage, you can be present, but you cannot do someone's healing for them. This realization can feel painful because helping people may be part of how you express love. But there is a difference between support and self-abandonment. Support says, I am here with you. Self-abandonment says, I will destroy my own peace so you never have to experience discomfort. You don't have to choose the second one. Detachment also means allowing people to experience the consequences of their choices. If someone repeatedly ignores responsibilities, you don't have to rescue them every time. If someone refuses to communicate, you don't have to keep creating explanations for them. If someone makes a decision that creates problems, you can care about them without taking ownership of the consequences. This isn't cruelty, it is respect. You respect yourself by maintaining boundaries, and you respect others by allowing them to have responsibility for their own lives. Another important part of emotional detachment is learning to tolerate uncertainty. Many people chase because uncertainty feels unbearable. They need to know where they stand. They need reassurance. They need immediate answers. They need to know whether someone still cares. But life rarely gives perfect certainty. Someone may need space. A relationship may be changing. A friendship may become more distant. Someone may not know what they want. You may not know what will happen next. The instinct is to chase clarity. You send another message. You ask another question. You demand reassurance. You analyze every detail. You try to force certainty out of an uncertain situation. Detachment teaches you to pause. You can say, I don't know what will happen, and I can still be okay. That sentence represents enormous emotional strength. It means you no longer need immediate answers to maintain your peace. It also changes how you experience rejection. Instead of seeing rejection as something you must prevent at all costs, you begin to see it as information. Someone may not choose you. Someone may not understand you. Someone may not want the same relationship you want. It hurts, but pain doesn't have to become desperation. You can grieve without chasing. You can miss someone without contacting them. You can love someone without returning to a situation that harms you. You can remember beautiful moments without convincing yourself that you must recreate them. This is what emotional freedom looks like. It doesn't mean you never feel anxious, sad, jealous, disappointed, or afraid. You are still human. Detachment doesn't remove emotions, it creates space between the emotion and the action. You can feel anger without sending the message you'll regret. You can feel rejection without begging someone to reconsider. You can feel loneliness without immediately searching for someone to fill the space. You can feel fear without allowing fear to make your decisions. That space is where self-control grows. And perhaps the most beautiful part of emotional detachment is that it allows you to love more freely. When you don't need someone to complete you, you can appreciate them without possessing them. When you don't need constant reassurance, you can enjoy connection without constantly testing it. When you know you can survive someone's departure, you don't have to cling to their presence. You can love without fear becoming the foundation of your love. You can give without keeping score. You can care without controlling. You can stay without begging. And you can leave without hatred. That is why emotional detachment is not indifference. Indifference says, I don't care what happens to you. Detachment says, I care about you, but I will not lose myself trying to control what happens. Your heart does not need to become harder. It needs to become more grounded, because the ultimate goal isn't to feel nothing. It is to feel deeply without being controlled by everything you feel. Chapter 8. Stop taking everything personally. One of the most exhausting ways to live is to believe that everything is about you. Someone becomes quiet and you wonder what you did. Someone doesn't respond and you assume they are angry. Someone criticizes you and you question your worth. A friend makes different plans and you immediately wonder whether they are tired of you. A stranger looks at you strangely and your mind creates a story about what they must think. Without realizing it, you begin carrying emotional meanings that may not belong to you at all. Taking everything personally often begins with a simple assumption. Their behavior must be connected to me. Sometimes it is. People can hurt us intentionally or unintentionally, and our actions can affect others. But not every change in someone's mood, every silence, every rejection, or every uncomfortable interaction is a statement about who you are. Other people have entire inner worlds that you cannot see. They have worries, insecurities, responsibilities, memories, fears, disappointments, and struggles that existed before you entered the room. Yet when you are highly sensitive to rejection or approval, your mind can make yourself the center of every situation. Someone sends a short reply, and instead of considering that they might be busy, you immediately think, they're upset with me. Someone doesn't invite you somewhere, and you think, they don't like me anymore. Someone disagrees with your opinion, and you interpret it as, they don't respect me. One small event becomes evidence for a much larger story. The problem is that the story may not be true. Your mind does not always distinguish between facts and interpretations. A fact might be, they haven't replied to my message. The interpretation is, they are ignoring me because I did something wrong. The fact is observable. The interpretation is a conclusion. Emotional detachment begins when you learn to separate the two. Imagine sending someone a message and receiving no response for several hours. Your mind immediately starts working. Maybe they're angry. Maybe you said something wrong. Maybe they are losing interest. Maybe they are talking to someone else. Soon, you are no longer reacting to the absence of a message. You are reacting to an entire imaginary story that your mind created around that absence. But you don't know the truth. They could be working. They could be sleeping. Their phone could be unavailable. They could be overwhelmed. They could simply need time before responding. There are countless possibilities, and your first interpretation is not automatically the correct one. This doesn't mean you should ignore patterns or pretend everything is fine. If someone repeatedly treats you with disrespect, you should pay attention. Emotional detachment is not denial. It is the ability to observe reality without adding unnecessary emotional stories to it. When someone behaves differently, ask yourself, what do I actually know? That question can interrupt hours of unnecessary suffering. You know they didn't respond. You don't know why. You know they disagreed with you. You don't know exactly what they think about you as a person. You know the relationship has changed. You don't automatically know that you are the reason. This distinction gives you breathing room. Another important part of not taking things personally is understanding that people often behave according to their own emotional state. A person who is impatient may be struggling with stress. Someone who is distant may be overwhelmed. Someone who criticizes everything may be deeply dissatisfied with themselves. Someone who constantly seeks control may be afraid of losing it. Understanding this doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior. It simply prevents you from immediately turning someone else's behavior into a judgment of yourself. Consider rejection. Rejection can feel deeply personal because it touches one of our oldest fears. I am not wanted. But rejection often means something more specific. Someone may not want the relationship you want. They may have different priorities. They may be attracted to someone else. They may not be emotionally available. They may simply feel differently. Their decision can hurt without defining you. Two people can meet, connect, and still not become a lasting relationship. That doesn't mean one person was defective and the other was superior. Sometimes compatibility simply isn't there. The same principle applies to criticism. Not every criticism deserves your emotional surrender. Some criticism contains valuable information. Some is based on misunderstanding. Some comes from someone's personal insecurity. Some is simply unfair. Your task is not to accept every opinion or reject every opinion. Your task is to evaluate it. Ask, is there something here I can learn? If there is, learn. If there isn't, let it go. You don't need to defend yourself against every judgment. This becomes especially important in the age of constant comparison. Social media makes it easy to believe that everyone is watching, evaluating, and judging you. You see someone else's success and assume you're falling behind. You see someone's relationship and assume yours is inadequate. You see someone's appearance and suddenly become dissatisfied with your own. But you are comparing your complete life with fragments of someone else's. You don't know their private struggles. You don't know their insecurities. You don't know what happens when the camera is turned off. Emotional detachment means learning to step outside this endless competition for approval. You don't have to win everyone's attention. You don't have to be understood by everyone. You don't have to correct every false assumption about you. You don't have to respond to every criticism. You don't have to turn every disagreement into a battle for acceptance. Sometimes peace comes from allowing people to have their opinions. Someone can misunderstand you and you can still know yourself. Someone can dislike you and you can still respect yourself. Someone can reject you and you can still believe you are worthy. Someone can leave and you can still remain whole. This is not emotional weakness, it is emotional independence. The next time you feel yourself taking something personally, pause before reacting. Ask yourself what happened, what you are assuming, and what evidence actually supports that assumption. Give yourself enough space to see the situation clearly. You may discover that the thing you were preparing to fight against was never really about you. And even when it is about you, you can still choose how much power you give it. Not everything deserves your attention. Not every opinion deserves your emotional energy. Not every rejection deserves a crisis of identity. You are allowed to let other people's behavior belong to them. You are allowed to stop carrying meanings that were never yours to carry. Because when you stop making everything a reflection of your worth, the world becomes lighter. You breathe differently. You react less. You understand more. And slowly, you discover one of the quietest forms of freedom. Other people's reactions no longer determine how you feel about yourself. Chapter 9. The Art of Walking Away. There is a moment when staying becomes more painful than leaving, yet leaving still feels impossible. You know something is no longer healthy for you, but your heart keeps searching for reasons to remain. You remember the good moments. You remember promises. You remember how things used to feel, and you wonder whether walking away means you are giving up too easily. Sometimes the hardest person to leave is not the person standing in front of you, but the person you remember them being. Walking away is rarely as simple as making a decision. The mind may understand long before the heart accepts it. You can know that a relationship is exhausting and still miss the person. You can recognize that someone repeatedly hurts you and still hope they will change. You can understand that you deserve better and still feel afraid of losing what you have. This conflict is what makes emotional detachment so difficult. We often imagine that if something is wrong for us, we should immediately stop caring, but emotions don't follow instructions. You can make the right decision and still feel sadness. You can choose distance and still experience longing. You can walk away from someone while a part of you wishes things could have been different. That does not mean your decision was wrong. It means you cared. Sometimes people stay because they confuse pain with proof of love. They think, if I leave, it means I didn't care enough. But love is not measured by how much suffering you are willing to tolerate. Sacrifice can be meaningful, but endless self-abandonment is not a requirement for genuine love. There comes a point when protecting your peace becomes more important than protecting a connection that continually damages it. The difficult question is knowing when that point has arrived. A healthy relationship will have imperfections. People will make mistakes. There will be misunderstandings, disagreements, disappointments, and moments when both people fall short. Walking away should not become an impulsive response to every uncomfortable experience. Emotional maturity requires the ability to communicate, repair, forgive, and give reasonable opportunities for growth. But there is a difference between imperfection and a pattern of harm. If you repeatedly communicate your needs and nothing changes, that tells you something. If apologies constantly replace accountability, that tells you something. If promises are repeatedly broken, that tells you something. If you have to abandon your boundaries to keep the relationship peaceful, that tells you something. Sometimes the clearest answer is not found in what someone says after you confront them. It is found in what they repeatedly do when the conversation is over. This is why walking away requires you to trust patterns more than promises. Promises can create hope. Patterns reveal reality. You may have heard someone say, "I'll change." Maybe they meant it when they said it. People can sincerely want to change and still fail to change. Intentions matter, but consistent behavior matters more when you are deciding what kind of relationship you can safely maintain. You cannot build your future around someone's potential. At some point, you have to make decisions based on what exists now. This can create grief. And grief is one of the most misunderstood parts of walking away. You may grieve the person. You may grieve the memories. You may grieve the future you imagined. You may grieve the version of yourself who believed the relationship would eventually become everything you wanted. Sometimes you are not just losing a person. You are losing a possibility. That is why moving on can feel confusing. You are not necessarily questioning whether the relationship was unhealthy. You are mourning what you hoped it could become. Allow yourself to grieve that. You don't have to insult the past to move forward. You don't have to convince yourself that the person was completely terrible. You can acknowledge that there were beautiful moments and still accept that the relationship was not right for you. Two things can be true. Someone can have brought happiness into your life and still not belong in your future. A relationship can have been meaningful and still need to end. You can love someone and still choose distance. This is one of the deepest forms of emotional detachment. Another obstacle is guilt. You may wonder whether walking away makes you selfish. You may think about everything the other person has been through. You may remember the promises you made. You may worry about hurting them. But guilt does not always mean you are doing something wrong. Sometimes guilt simply appears because you are doing something unfamiliar. If you have spent years putting everyone else's needs before your own, choosing yourself will initially feel selfish. If you are accustomed to fixing problems, refusing to fix another person's choices may feel cruel. If you have always been responsible for keeping relationships together, letting one fall apart can feel like failure. But you are not responsible for keeping every relationship alive. Relationships require participation from both people. Walking away also becomes difficult when you fear loneliness. You may think, what if I never find someone else? Or, what if leaving is a mistake? These questions can keep you trapped in situations that you already know are unhealthy. But staying with someone simply because you are afraid of being alone is not the same as choosing love. Fear is making the decision. And fear is a poor foundation for a peaceful life. Sometimes you need to experience the emptiness after leaving before you can discover what that space makes possible. At first, the silence may feel unbearable. You may instinctively reach for your phone. You may want to check their social media. You may want to send one final message. You may create reasons to contact them. This is where emotional discipline matters. You don't have to act on every feeling. Missing someone is a feeling. It is not an instruction. Loneliness is a feeling. It is not proof that you made the wrong decision. Nostalgia is a feeling. It is not evidence that you should return. You can allow feelings to exist without letting them dictate your actions. Walking away is not about winning. It is not about making the other person regret losing you. It is not about disappearing so they will finally chase you. If you leave with the secret hope that they will come running back, you may still be emotionally attached to the outcome. True detachment says, I am leaving because this is no longer healthy for me, regardless of what you do next. That is a completely different kind of strength. You stop waiting for an apology to validate your decision. You stop needing them to admit that they hurt you. You stop requiring them to understand why you left. Sometimes closure is not a conversation. Sometimes closure is acceptance. You accept that you may never receive the explanation you wanted. You accept that someone may never understand your perspective. You accept that the ending may remain imperfect, and you still move forward. There is a beautiful freedom in realizing that you don't need permission to protect your peace. You can leave quietly. You can stop participating in conversations that continually hurt you. You can create distance without hatred. You can remember someone without returning to them. You can wish someone well from far away. And you can choose a different future. Eventually, walking away stops feeling like losing someone and starts feeling like returning to yourself. You begin rediscovering your routines, your interests, your confidence, your friendships, your quiet moments. You realize how much emotional energy was consumed by trying to keep something alive. And then you understand something important. You were never walking away from love. You were walking away from the version of love that required you to abandon yourself. The art of walking away is not about becoming heartless. It is about becoming brave enough to leave what continually asks you to betray your own needs. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is stop knocking on a door that keeps refusing to open. And sometimes the moment you finally walk away is the moment you begin walking toward the life you were too emotionally exhausted to see. Chapter 10. Breaking the Cycle. Breaking self-sabotage does not begin with becoming a completely different person overnight. It begins with recognizing the moment when an old pattern starts to take control. For years, you may have responded to fear, rejection, uncertainty, criticism, or disappointment in the same familiar ways. You may have withdrawn, procrastinated, overthought, quit, become defensive, or convinced yourself that you did not care. These responses can feel automatic because repetition has turned them into habits. But automatic does not mean permanent. A pattern can be interrupted. The first step is awareness. You cannot change what you consistently fail to notice. Many self-sabotaging behaviors happen so quickly that you only recognize them after the consequences appear. You send the message you regret, you miss the opportunity, you abandon the project, you push someone away, then you look back and wonder why you behaved that way. Instead of waiting for the aftermath, begin learning to recognize the pattern while it is happening. Pay attention to your moments of emotional intensity. When do you suddenly want to quit? When do you become defensive? When do you feel the need to escape? When do you start creating reasons why something will not work? These moments are clues. They show you where your automatic patterns are most active. One useful way to understand your pattern is to identify the trigger. A trigger is an event, situation, thought or feeling that activates a familiar emotional response. It might be criticism from a manager, silence from someone you love, an unexpected opportunity, a difficult task, a financial challenge, or even praise that makes you uncomfortable. The trigger itself may be neutral, but your interpretation of it can activate an old pattern. After identifying the trigger, notice the emotion. Are you afraid, embarrassed, angry, ashamed, overwhelmed, jealous, lonely? Sometimes the emotion underneath the behavior is completely different from what appears on the surface. Anger may hide fear. Procrastination may hide insecurity. Withdrawal may hide the desire to be reassured. Perfectionism may hide the fear of being judged. Then examine the thought that follows the emotion. Your mind may immediately create a story. They don't respect me. I'm going to fail. I can't handle this. They will eventually leave. I'm not good enough. There is no point trying. These thoughts often feel like facts because they arrive automatically, but automatic thoughts deserve examination, not blind obedience. Ask yourself whether the thought is accurate, exaggerated, or based on an old experience. Ask what evidence supports it and what evidence contradicts it. Ask whether you are responding to what is actually happening or to what you fear might happen. This simple process can create distance between your emotional reaction and your decision. That distance is where change begins. The next step is interruption. When you recognize the familiar pattern, do something different before the old behavior takes over. Take a breath. Step away for a few minutes. Write down what you are feeling. Delay sending the message. Start the task for 5 minutes instead of demanding that you finish everything. Have the difficult conversation instead of disappearing. Ask a question instead of assuming the worst. The action does not need to be dramatic. It simply needs to be different from the automatic response. This is important because your brain learns through repetition. Every time you interrupt an old pattern and choose a healthier response, you create a new pathway. One decision will not transform your life, but hundreds of small decisions can transform the direction of your life. You also need to replace the behavior rather than simply remove it. If you tell yourself, "I will stop procrastinating," but give yourself no alternative when anxiety appears, the old habit will probably return. Instead, replace avoidance with a specific action. When you feel overwhelmed, break the task into the smallest possible step. When you feel the urge to withdraw, communicate honestly. When you feel the urge to criticize yourself, identify what you can learn from the mistake. When uncertainty makes you want to quit, give yourself a defined period to continue before making a final decision. A replacement behavior gives your mind somewhere to go. Another important part of breaking the cycle is accepting that discomfort will remain. You cannot build a new life while demanding that every decision feel comfortable. Growth often creates uncertainty. Setting boundaries may make someone unhappy. Starting something new may make you feel incompetent. Being vulnerable may make you feel exposed. Taking responsibility may create pressure. These feelings do not necessarily mean you are making the wrong choice. Sometimes discomfort is evidence that you are doing something unfamiliar. This is why patience matters. If you have spent years responding to stress through avoidance, You cannot expect yourself to become perfectly calm after one attempt. You may still fall back into old behaviors. You may recognize a trigger and react anyway. You may make progress for weeks and then have a difficult day. Do not turn one mistake into another reason to sabotage yourself. A setback is information. Instead of saying, "I failed again," ask, "What happened just before I returned to the old pattern?" Perhaps you were exhausted. Perhaps you felt rejected. Perhaps you expected too much from yourself. Perhaps the replacement behavior was too difficult. Use the setback to refine your approach rather than attack your identity. It is also useful to create environments that make healthy choices easier. Self-control becomes more difficult when your surroundings constantly trigger old habits. If your phone destroys your concentration, create distance from it while working. If certain conversations repeatedly pull you into destructive arguments, establish boundaries. If being around particular environments encourages behavior you are trying to leave behind, reduce your exposure when possible. You are not weak for designing your environment around your goals. You are being intentional. Breaking self-sabotage also requires learning to make decisions based on your values rather than your temporary emotions. Ask yourself, what matters to me? And what kind of person do I want to be when this moment is over? These questions shift your focus from immediate relief to long-term meaning. You may still feel afraid, but you can choose courage. You may still feel uncertain, but you can choose patience. You may still feel rejected, but you can choose self-respect. You may still feel overwhelmed, but you can choose one small step. That is how the cycle begins to break. Not through one perfect decision, but through repeated moments when you recognize the old pattern and refuse to let it decide your next move. Eventually, the pause becomes easier. The healthier response becomes more familiar. The behavior that once felt automatic begins to lose its power. And one day, you may find yourself standing in a situation that would once have triggered the same destructive reaction and realize that you no longer have to respond the way you used to. That is what breaking the cycle truly means. You are not becoming someone who never struggles. You are becoming someone who no longer allows every struggle to control the direction of your life. Chapter 11. Becoming your own ally. For a long time, you may have believed that being hard on yourself was the price of becoming better. Every mistake needed punishment. Every weakness needed criticism. Every achievement was followed by another demand. You told yourself that if you stopped pushing, judging, and pressuring yourself, you would become lazy, careless, or unsuccessful. But there is a difference between holding yourself accountable and constantly being at war with yourself. Accountability helps you grow. Self-attack slowly teaches you to believe that you are the problem. Becoming your own ally begins when you stop treating yourself as someone who must constantly be defeated. Think about how you respond when someone you care about makes a mistake. You may tell them the truth. You may point out what they could have done differently. But you probably do not tell them that one mistake makes them worthless. You do not remind them of every failure they have ever made. You do not demand that they become perfect before they deserve kindness. Yet many people speak to themselves in exactly those ways. They make one mistake and say, "I always ruin everything." They miss one goal and say, "I'm useless." They experience rejection and think, "Nobody will ever want me." They fail at something and conclude, "I knew I wasn't capable." The problem with this kind of thinking is that it turns an event into an identity. Instead of saying, "I made a poor decision," you say, "I am a bad person." Instead of saying, "This attempt didn't work," you say, "I can't succeed." Once the mistake becomes part of your identity, changing the behavior becomes much harder. Self-trust begins with separating who you are from what you did. You are allowed to make a poor decision without becoming a poor person. You are allowed to struggle without becoming a failure. You are allowed to be inexperienced without being incapable. You are allowed to make progress slowly without believing that you are falling behind. This does not mean avoiding responsibility. In fact, genuine self-respect requires responsibility. If you hurt someone, acknowledge it. If you waste an opportunity, learn from it. If you break a promise, take responsibility and decide how to rebuild trust. Compassion does not mean pretending that your choices have no consequences. It means facing the consequences without turning them into a reason to hate yourself. This distinction is essential because shame often produces the very behavior you want to eliminate. When you feel ashamed, you may want to hide. When you hide, you avoid responsibility. When you avoid responsibility, the problem grows. Then you feel more ashamed. The cycle continues. Self-compassion interrupts that cycle. It allows you to look honestly at yourself without destroying yourself in the process. Imagine someone who has repeatedly promised themselves that they will work toward an important goal, but keeps giving up. Each failure makes them angry with themselves. Eventually, they stop trusting their own promises. They think, "Why should I even try? I never follow through." So they make another ambitious plan, fail to maintain it, and use the failure as further evidence that they cannot depend on themselves. The solution is not another dramatic promise. The solution is evidence. Self-trust is built through small promises that you actually keep. Instead of promising to transform your entire life, choose one behavior you can realistically maintain. Read for 15 minutes. Work on the project for 20 minutes. Take the walk you promised yourself you would take. Finish one important task before checking your phone. Go to sleep when you said you would. These actions may seem insignificant, but each one sends a message to your mind. When I give myself a promise, I can depend on myself. Over time, those messages accumulate. You begin to trust yourself not because you repeated a positive statement, but because your behavior gave you evidence. This is especially important after years of self-sabotage. You may have broken many promises to yourself. You may have started and abandoned countless goals. You may have told yourself that you would change and then returned to the same habits. It is understandable if your confidence in yourself has become weak. But trust can be rebuilt. Think about trust in any relationship. You do not rebuild it with one grand speech. You rebuild it through consistent actions. The same is true with yourself. Every small promise kept becomes another piece of evidence. Every time you act according to your values instead of your impulse, you strengthen the relationship you have with yourself. Becoming your own ally also means learning to listen to your needs without allowing every desire to control you. Sometimes you need rest. Sometimes you need discipline. Sometimes you need to say no. Sometimes you need to try again. Sometimes you need to admit that something is not working and change direction. Self-respect is not always comfortable. There will be moments when respecting yourself means walking away from something familiar. There will be moments when it means setting a boundary that someone else does not like. There will be moments when it means choosing long-term growth over immediate pleasure. Being your own ally does not mean always choosing the easiest option. It means choosing what genuinely serves your well-being and values. Another important part of becoming your own ally is learning to speak to yourself differently when you fail. Instead of saying, "I ruined everything," ask, "What can I learn from what happened?" Instead of saying, "I always do this," ask, "What triggered this behavior?" Instead of saying, "I am not enough," ask, "What skill, knowledge, or support do I need to improve?" These questions move you from identity-based judgment toward problem-solving. The language you use with yourself matters because repeated language becomes repeated belief. If you constantly describe yourself as weak, incapable, unlucky, broken, or undisciplined, you may eventually behave according to that identity. But when you describe yourself as someone who is learning, practicing, rebuilding, and becoming more aware, you create room for growth. You do not have to convince yourself that everything is perfect. You simply need to stop making every imperfection evidence against your worth. There will still be difficult days. You will still make mistakes. You will sometimes procrastinate, lose your temper, doubt yourself, or return briefly to an old pattern. Becoming your own ally does not mean becoming incapable of failure. It means refusing to abandon yourself when failure happens. That may be one of the deepest forms of self-respect, staying with yourself when you are disappointed in yourself. Because anyone can support themselves when everything is going well. The real relationship is revealed when things fall apart. When you fail, stay. When you are afraid, stay. When you make a mistake, stay. When you feel ashamed, stay. When you don't know what to do next, stay. Then take the next honest step. You have spent enough time proving that you can criticize yourself. Now you can learn something more powerful: how to trust yourself. Your life does not need another enemy. It needs an ally. And that ally can begin with the person you see in the mirror. Chapter 12. Choosing yourself again and again. Understanding yourself can change the way you see your life, but understanding alone is not enough. At some point, insight has to become action. You can recognize your fears, understand your wounds, identify your triggers, and see the patterns that have kept you stuck. But eventually, you must decide what you will do with that knowledge. You must decide whether the person you have been will continue making every decision, or whether you are ready to give your future a voice. Choosing yourself does not mean becoming selfish. It means refusing to abandon your values, your potential, your peace, and your future, simply because fear makes another choice feel easier. For a long time, you may have allowed painful experiences to define you. A rejection became proof that you were not worthy. A failure became proof that you were incapable. A difficult relationship became proof that love was dangerous. A missed opportunity became proof that you were simply unlucky. Slowly, individual experiences became an identity. But an experience is not an identity. You are not the mistake you made. You are not the opportunity you missed. You are not the relationship that ended. You are not the version of yourself who once lacked confidence, discipline, direction, or courage. Those experiences may have influenced you, but they do not have to control what happens next. Choosing yourself begins when you separate your identity from your history. This does not require pretending that the past never happened. You can acknowledge what hurt you without allowing it to dictate every future decision. You can remember betrayal without assuming everyone will betray you. You can remember failure without assuming you will always fail. You can remember rejection without deciding that you are unworthy of love. Your past can explain your patterns without becoming the author of your future. Sometimes choosing yourself requires forgiveness, not because everything that happened was acceptable, but because carrying resentment forever can keep you emotionally connected to something you desperately want to leave behind. You may need to forgive someone who hurt you. You may also need to forgive yourself for the years you spent running away, the opportunities you wasted, the people you pushed away, and the promises you broke. Self-forgiveness is not an excuse. It is a decision to stop using yesterday's mistakes as punishment for tomorrow's possibilities. You cannot change the choices you made years ago, but you can decide what those choices mean now. A mistake can become evidence that you are broken, or it can become information about what you need to learn. A failed relationship can become proof that you are unlovable, or it can teach you about boundaries, communication, and the patterns you need to change. A missed opportunity can become a lifelong regret, or it can become a reminder to act differently when the next opportunity appears. The meaning you give your past influences the direction of your future. Choosing yourself also means accepting that transformation will not happen perfectly. Old patterns may return. Fear may come back. You may have moments when you procrastinate, withdraw, overthink, or doubt yourself. You may make progress for weeks and then have one difficult day that feels like a return to the old version of you. Do not turn a setback into an identity. One difficult day does not erase months of growth. One mistake does not mean you are back where you started. When an old pattern returns, become curious instead of cruel. Ask what triggered it. Ask what emotion you were trying to escape. Ask what you can do differently the next time. Then begin again. Choosing yourself happens in small moments. It happens when you keep a promise to yourself, even though nobody is watching. It happens when you say no to something that repeatedly damages your peace. It happens when you ask for help instead of pretending you can handle everything alone. It happens when you begin the project you have been postponing. It happens when you tell the truth instead of hiding behind an excuse. It happens when you leave a situation that requires you to betray yourself to remain in it. These choices may appear small, but they shape identity. Every time you act according to your values, you provide yourself with evidence about who you are becoming. You begin seeing yourself as someone capable of keeping promises, facing discomfort, setting boundaries, learning from mistakes, and continuing after failure. That is how a new identity is built. Not through a single dramatic transformation, but through repeated choices. You cannot guarantee that every decision will succeed. You cannot guarantee that everyone will understand you. You cannot guarantee that every relationship will last or that every dream will become reality. Life will always contain uncertainty, but uncertainty does not have to become an excuse for self-destruction. You can choose courage without certainty. You can choose honesty without knowing how others will respond. You can choose growth without knowing exactly where it will lead. You can choose love while accepting that vulnerability carries risk. The goal is not to create a life where nothing hurts. The goal is to create a life where pain no longer automatically makes you abandon yourself. When fear tells you to return to the person you used to be, remember that familiar does not always mean safe. Sometimes the unfamiliar path is uncomfortable because it leads somewhere you have never been. Sometimes becoming healthier, stronger, calmer, and more confident feels strange simply because you have spent so long living according to old patterns. Let it feel strange. You are allowed to become unfamiliar to the version of yourself that once survived by staying small. Choose yourself when fear tells you to disappear. Choose yourself when comfort tells you to remain stuck. Choose yourself when your inner critic says you are not enough. Choose yourself when your past tells you that nothing will change. And if you fall, choose yourself again. Because transformation is not about never returning to old patterns. It is about returning to yourself faster when you do. Your past may explain how you became who you are, but your choices decide who you become next. You do not have to become perfect. You do not have to become fearless. You simply have to stop abandoning yourself again and again and again. You have reached the end of this journey, but the real work begins when the audiobook ends. You now understand that self-sabotage is rarely about simply being lazy, weak, or incapable. Beneath many destructive patterns are fears, wounds, beliefs, and emotional habits that once tried to protect you. But something that protected you in the past can become the very thing that prevents you from living fully in the present. You do not have to keep repeating the same story. The next time you feel the urge to run from an opportunity, push someone away, procrastinate on something meaningful, or tell yourself that you are not enough, pause. Look beneath the reaction. Ask what you are afraid of. Ask what you are trying to protect. Then ask whether that protection is still necessary. You may not be able to control every thought, emotion, or circumstance, but you can learn to control what you do next. That is where your freedom begins. You don't need to become fearless. You don't need to become perfect. You don't need to erase your past. You simply need to stop allowing your past to make every decision about your future. Choose yourself when fear tells you to disappear. Choose courage when comfort tells you to stay stuck. Choose self-respect when your inner critic tells you that you are not enough. Choose growth when the familiar feels easier. And when you fall back into an old pattern, don't use it as proof that you cannot change. Pause, learn, and begin again. Because the life you want may not be waiting for a completely different version of you. It may simply be waiting for you to stop standing in your own way.